The scream tore through the hush of the Holloway Institute like a blade through silk. He's not breathing.
It's okay, sweetie.
Somebody
Breathe
help
with me.
him.
You're safe now.
My
The
throat
lobby
feels
was
tight.
built
I
for
know. We're going to the
silence.
doctor. Let's get up.
Glass walls rising 3 stories.
Breathe in, buddy.
Marble
Just
floors
breathe.
polished
So
to a
long, my
mirror
baby.
sheen.
He's getting it. Hang
Air
on.
so
Thank
still
you.
you could
Thank
hear
you
the
so much.
soft chime of elevators arriving on distant floors. This was a cathedral of science and money where the only acceptable sounds were the whisper of expensive shoes and the murmur of breakthrough discoveries. But Patricia Johnson's voice shattered all of that raw and jagged with a terror no amount of wealth could armor against. She was on her knees, her tailored black trousers pressed against cold stone. Her son Michael collapsed in her arms. 8 years old, his lips were turning a horrifying shade of blue-purple, his chest heaving in shallow, useless gasps. A protein bar lay discarded 3 feet away, its wrapper clearly listing peanuts as the second ingredient. Anaphylaxis, the kind that killed in minutes if you didn't know what you were doing. Dr. Jennifer Williams stood frozen 10 feet away, her brilliant mind cycling through medical protocols, epinephrine, airway management, supplemental oxygen, but her body refused to move. She was an immunologist, not an emergency physician. She studied cellular responses in controlled environments, not dying children on marble floors. The paralysis of watching a life slip away in real time locked her joints, turned her tongue to lead. Security guards rushed forward, hands fumbling for radios, their training designed for intruders and workplace disputes, not medical catastrophes. Someone had called for the on-site medical team, but they were 3 floors up, a world away. 20 seconds had passed since Patricia's scream. Michael had maybe 2 minutes before irreversible brain damage began. Robert Williams dropped his floor buffer mid-stroke. The machine's hum died with a mechanical whine as he moved, not running but flowing across the marble with the economy of motion that comes from 10,000 hours of emergency response. He wore gray coveralls with custodial services stitched across the back, work boots, worn soft at the heels, latex gloves slightly too large for his hands, invisible. He had been invisible for 5 years, and that invisibility was the only armor keeping his daughter alive. But a child was dying, and some instincts ran deeper than self-preservation. He slid to his knees beside Patricia, the movement practiced and precise. "Ma'am, I need you to give me some space." His voice was low, steady, carrying the calm authority of someone who had talked parents through worse. Patricia's eyes snapped to him, wild with panic and the first edges of fury. "Who are you? Get a doctor. Someone get a—" Robert was already assessing. Lips cyanotic, rapid, shallow-breathing stridor on inhalation. Classic anaphylactic response with secondary bronchospasm. His hands moved to Michael's shoulder and back, tilting him forward into a position that would open the airway as much as possible. "Michael, can you hear me? I'm Robert. I'm going to help you, okay? I need you to try to breathe with me." The protein bar wrapper caught his eye. He recognized the brand, knew exactly which allergens it contained. Allergic reaction. His airways closing. Does he have an emergency inhaler? The question jolted Patricia out of her frozen panic. Her hands dove into Michael's backpack with shaking fingers, pulling out a small blue albuterol inhaler. She thrust it toward Robert, her other hand still gripping her son's shoulder. Robert took it, his movements unhurried despite the seconds ticking away. He popped the cap, reached into the backpack's front pocket, where most parents kept spacers, and found the clear plastic chamber exactly where he expected. The snap click of assembling the 2 pieces was muscle memory, the shake of the canister automatic. "Okay, Michael, this is going to help. I need you to breathe out as much as you can. Empty those lungs for me. Good boy, that's good." He waited, counting heartbeats, watching the slight deflation of Michael's chest. Timing was everything. Press too soon and the medication would hit closed airways and do nothing. Wait too long and there would be no airways left to medicate. The moment arrived. Robert pressed the canister, heard the soft hiss of aerosolized medication releasing into the spacer, and brought it to Michael's lips. "Slow breath in, buddy. Slow and steady. That's it. Hold it. 1, 2, 3, 4. Perfect. Now let it out, doctor." Williams had unfrozen enough to move closer, her scientific mind cataloging what she was witnessing. This wasn't basic first aid. This was clinical expertise, the kind that came from managing pediatric respiratory emergencies in high-stress environments. The custodian's hands were steady, his timing perfect, his assessment accurate. He wasn't guessing. He knew. Robert administered a second puff, maintaining the same careful timing. Michael's breathing was still labored, but the blue tinge was fading from his lips, replaced by a sickly pale pink. The wheezing had shifted pitch, becoming less high and desperate, not out of danger but no longer actively dying. The medical team burst through the main entrance, a gurney rattling across marble, an emergency kit swinging from one paramedic's hand. They moved fast, professional, ready to take over. Robert had maybe 30 seconds before questions started. What happened? The lead paramedic was already kneeling, checking Michael's pulse. Anaphylactic response, secondary asthma attack. Administered 2 puffs of albuterol via spacer approximately 90 seconds ago. Vitals are stabilizing, but he needs a full workup and observation. Robert's voice was flat, clinical, the verbal handoff as precise as any ER nurse. The paramedic's eyes flickered to Robert's gray coveralls, a question forming, but Michael chose that moment to start crying, weak, exhausted sobs that nonetheless indicated air moving through lungs. The question died as the team shifted into transport mode, lifting Michael onto the gurney, checking oxygen saturation, radioing ahead to the ER. Robert stood stepping back into the shadow of a marble column. His hands were trembling now, adrenaline draining out and leaving hollow exhaustion in its wake. He'd broken cover, used skills that a high school graduate who mops floors shouldn't possess, revealed himself in front of security cameras, medical professionals, and most dangerous of all, Patricia Johnson, CEO of the corporation that owned this building, woman whose net worth exceeded the GDP of small nations and who was currently staring at him with the kind of focused intensity that preceded hostile corporate acquisitions. He needed to disappear before that intensity sharpened into investigation. Robert retrieved his floor buffer, the motor starting with a familiar rumble, and moved toward the west corridor with the slow, methodical pace of someone whose job was to be invisible. Behind him, Patricia rose to her feet, her composure reassembling like armor plates locking into place. She watched him go, committing every detail to memory height, build the particular way he moved the worn work boots that suggested years in this job. "Mom!" Michael's voice was a weak whisper from the gurney, barely audible over the paramedic's radio chatter. Patricia tore her gaze away from the retreating custodian, moved to her son's side. "I'm here, baby. You're going to be okay." The quiet man. Michael's hand reached weakly toward where Robert had been. "He told me a story about a star that forgot how to shine, but another star came and reminded it." Patricia's jaw tightened. Stories. The man had told her dying son stories while saving his life. She looked toward the corridor where he'd vanished, then at her head of security, who had been utterly useless during the crisis. Her voice dropped to the temperature of liquid nitrogen. "Find out everything about that man. Name, employment history, background check, financials. Everything. On my desk in 1 hour." The guard nodded, already pulling out his phone. "His name is Robert Williams, ma'am. Night custodial crew, been here about 5 years." Patricia's eyes narrowed. 5 years of invisibility, of pushing mops and emptying trash cans, and then suddenly transforms into a pediatric emergency specialist the moment her son stops breathing. No. People didn't work like that. Skills like those came from training, from repetition, from a life spent in high-stakes medical environments. Whatever Robert Williams was, he wasn't a simple custodian. And Patricia Johnson had built her empire on knowing when people were lying. The smell of antiseptic clung to Robert's clothes like accusations as he pushed open the door to his apartment. Capitol Hill, Seattle. A 4th-floor walk-up in a building that had been cheap when he'd moved in and was now merely affordable because the landlord was too old to care about maximizing profit. He slipped off his work boots, leaving them by the door, and padded in socked feet across the living room. The space was sterile, not clean sterile. Every surface scrubbed, every piece of fabric, washable air purifier humming in the corner. The couch was vinyl, easy to disinfect. The kitchen was minimal, mostly used for preparing medical-grade nutrition shakes. This wasn't a home. This was a decontamination zone, a buffer between the contaminated outside world and the fragile life he was trying to protect. In the corner, bathed in the soft glow of a specialized medical nightlight, Emma slept. 7 years old, small for her age, her body curled in a modified hospital bed that allowed for elevation and monitoring. An IV line ran from a quietly humming pump to the back of her hand, delivering immunoglobulin replacement therapy that her body could no longer produce on its own. Her breathing was shallow, each breath a conscious effort her weakened system had to fight for. Robert knelt beside her bed, his calloused hand gentle as it brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead. Her skin was translucent veins visible beneath like blue threads under rice paper. Primary immunodeficiency, the doctors called it. A genetic lottery loss that meant her body couldn't defend itself against anything. A common cold could kill her. A bacterial infection would be catastrophic. She lived in this controlled environment, and even then her T-cell counts were dropping, inflammation markers climbing her small body, slowly losing a war against nothing. "Hey, sweet bug." His voice was soft, carrying none of the clinical precision from the lobby. This was the voice reserved for bedtime stories and bad days. "Daddy's home." Emma's eyes opened, hazel and impossibly large in her thin face. A smile ghosted across her lips, the kind that could break hearts and remake them stronger. "Did you clean the stars tonight?" The question was ritual, the same every night. In Emma's imagination, the Holloway Institute, that gleaming tower of glass and steel visible from their apartment window, was where stars were kept when they weren't in the sky. And her father's job was to polish them until they shone bright enough to go back up. It was easier than explaining he mopped floors to pay for medications that barely kept her alive. "I did. Polished every single one. There was one that was particularly stubborn tonight, but I got it shining in the end." Emma's smile widened fractionally. "Tell me about the stubborn star." Robert settled into the worn armchair beside her bed, the same chair he'd spent countless nights in, watching her breathe, counting her heartbeats, making deals with gods he didn't believe in. He began weaving a story about a star that had forgotten how to shine, that needed another star to remind it of its purpose. The words came automatically, a narrative assembled from pieces of other stories designed to be soothing and safe and utterly divorced from the reality of watching a child turn blue and fighting the knowledge that every second counted. But tonight the images behind his words weren't of celestial bodies. They were of Michael Johnson's face, lips, the color of old bruises, chest heaving for air that wouldn't come. They were of that moment when instinct had overridden survival, when he'd stopped being Robert Williams, the invisible custodian, and become someone else, someone he'd buried 5 years ago. For 10 minutes this evening he'd been a pediatric ICU nurse again. And someone had noticed. 15 floors above the city, Dr. Jennifer Williams stood in her lab staring at a monitor displaying the molecular structure of a binding agent that refused to behave according to her models. The lobby incident had shaken her more than she wanted to admit. Not just the child nearly dying, though that was horrifying enough, but her own paralysis. She was a scientist, someone who solved problems, who saw patterns where others saw chaos. And she'd frozen. Completely, utterly frozen. While a custodian had saved a life. "Anything—" Her voice was sharper than intended. Christopher Hernandez looked up from his workstation. Dark circles under his eyes, testimony to too many late nights chasing data that refused to cooperate. 28 years old, brilliant with pattern recognition, loyal to a fault. Results on batch 7 are the same, doctor. The cell cultures aren't binding. It's like the control group is contaminated again. Jennifer's hand went to her hair, fingers catching on tangles she hadn't bothered to brush out that morning. This was the third batch in 2 weeks to fail. The HVT-074 therapy. Her life's work, the breakthrough that was supposed to revolutionize treatment for rare pediatric autoimmune disorders, was stalling. And Patricia Johnson was not a patient woman. The email from 1 hour ago still burned on her screen, the words seared into her memory. Subject delays, Dr. Williams, today's events unfortunate. Let's not have similar surprises with my investment. The board requires a progress report by Friday. I expect significant positive data. Don't disappoint me. 27 words that carried the weight of professional annihilation. Patricia didn't make threats. She made statements of inevitable consequence. Fail to deliver and funding would evaporate. The lab would close. Years of research would become corporate property to be shelved or sold. And somewhere children who were running out of time would simply run out. Jennifer closed the laptop harder than necessary. "Run it again, Christopher. Triple-check the temperature logs, the batch numbers, everything. Someone's being sloppy and I need to know if it's us or the equipment." In her penthouse, Patricia Johnson sat beside her son's bed, her hand resting on his small shoulder as he slept, sedation and exhaustion combining to keep him under. The private physician had confirmed what she already knew. Without immediate intervention, Michael would have died in that lobby. The custodian, Robert Williams, had executed a textbook response to anaphylactic shock with secondary bronchospasm. The file from her head of security lay open on the nightstand. She picked it up, scanning the details for the third time. Subject: Robert Williams, age 38. Employment: custodial services, 5 years. Holloway Institute. Warehouse logistics, 2 years. Temporary labor, 3 years. Education: Northgate High School diploma. Next of kin: Emma Williams' daughter, age 7. Criminal record: none. Credit: poor. Multiple medical collections. Bankruptcy filed 4 years ago. Residence: Capitol Hill, apartment, $1,200 per month. A portrait of working-class struggle, utterly unremarkable, except for one detail that glared like a neon sign in fog. "There's a gap," her security chief had told her, his voice careful. "Almost 4 years between his last temp job and when he started in warehouse logistics. No employment records, no credit activity, no tax returns. It's like he fell off the grid completely." People didn't fall off grids accidentally. People fell off grids when they were running, hiding, or rebuilding from something catastrophic. And whatever Robert Williams was hiding, it involved medical skills far beyond anything a high school graduate who emptied trash cans should possess. Patricia set the file down, her mind already assembling investigative strategies. She would start with the daughter, 7 years old, which meant medical records, school enrollment, pediatric care. Then work backward through the gap, find the fracture point where Robert Williams had stopped being whoever he was before and started being a custodian. In his apartment, Robert sat at the kitchen table after Emma had drifted back to sleep. He opened a locked drawer, pulling out a worn folder held together with a rubber band that had lost its elasticity years ago. Inside, medical bills in the 5- and 6-figure range, insurance denial letters stamped with bureaucratic finality, and a single glossy brochure from the Holloway Institute's Department of Immunological Research. He unfolded the brochure, his eyes finding the section he'd highlighted in red marker months ago. Phase 3. Trials for HVT-074, currently underway with unprecedented results in treating rare pediatric autoimmune disorders. For more information about enrollment criteria. The rest didn't matter. He'd called, been told the trial was closed to new enrollments, explained Emma's condition, her deteriorating T-cell counts, her body's progressive failure to defend itself against routine pathogens. Been told politely and with genuine sympathy that compassionate use exceptions required board approval and extraordinary circumstances. He'd asked what qualified as extraordinary. The silence on the other end had been answer enough. Money, connections, something a custodian with a bankruptcy on his record and medical debt exceeding his life's earnings would never possess. Last week, Dr. Rodriguez at the community clinic had been blunt in the way good doctors were when there was no more time for gentle truths. "The immunosuppressants aren't holding her anymore, Robert. Her T-cell count is dropping again. The inflammation markers are the highest we've ever seen. So we increase the dosage. We're already at maximum safe levels. It's time to start talking about palliative options, making her comfortable. Palliative, comfortable. Euphemisms that meant they were giving up that Emma's 8 years on Earth would be her only ones, that the little girl who called him daddy and believed he polished stars was going to die because a billion-dollar research institute wouldn't make an exception for a man who cleaned their floors. Robert closed the folder, returned it to the locked drawer. He looked at the brochure one more time before putting it away at Dr. Jennifer Williams's photo beneath a headline about breakthrough discoveries and revolutionary therapies. The same Dr. Williams who had frozen in the lobby, who ran the very research that could save Emma, who worked 15 floors above his head, while he scrubbed toilets and prayed she'd succeed before his daughter's time ran out. The irony was a knife that twisted every night. Somewhere in the building's vast network of ventilation and infrastructure, a small mechanical failure was beginning. A secondary coolant pump in Dr. Williams's cryogenic storage unit, tasked with maintaining precise temperatures for irreplaceable research samples, had a manufacturing defect in its sealing gasket. The defect was minor, a hairline fracture invisible to casual inspection. But over the past month, that fracture had grown millimeter by millimeter until the seal no longer held pressure properly. The pump was failing, slowly, gradually, in a way that wouldn't trip automatic alarms, but would cause temperature fluctuations just significant enough to contaminate cell cultures and ruin months of work. No one knew yet. The warning light on the control panel was covered by a piece of black electrical tape placed there by careful hands that understood exactly how to make success look like failure. The next evening, Robert felt the difference the moment he stepped through the Institute's service entrance. The security guard's eyes lingered half a second too long. Another guard stationed by the elevator banks tracked his movement across the lobby with the focused attention reserved for persons of interest. The cameras, always there, always recording, felt weighted. Now their lenses following his path with algorithmic precision, fed by new parameters. He was no longer invisible. The floor buffer's familiar rumble was oddly comforting as he worked his way through the west corridor, falling into the rhythm of overlapping passes and careful attention to corners. Mindless work that let his thoughts spiral. Patricia Johnson had investigated him. Of course she had. A woman with her resources wouldn't leave unknown variables unexamined. The only question was how deep she'd dug and what she'd found in that 4-year gap he'd worked so hard to bury. The executive elevator chimed at 8:47 p.m., 43 minutes after most of the research staff had gone home. Robert didn't need to look to know who was stepping out. The click of expensive heels on marble was distinctive, the subtle rustle of tailored fabric, a signature sound. Patricia Johnson dressed down from her usual boardroom armor. Black slacks, cashmere sweater, still wearing enough to buy his yearly salary, and holding Michael's hand, the boy, looking tired but recovered, a small backpack decorated with cartoon astronauts hanging from one shoulder. "Mr. Williams." Robert stopped buffing, turned slowly, kept his expression neutral, the face of someone accustomed to being beneath notice. "Ma'am." "Michael has something he wanted to give you." Patricia's voice was warm, but her eyes were analytical, cataloging every micro-expression, every unconscious tell. She was hunting, and he was prey. Michael stepped forward, holding out a folded piece of construction paper. His hands trembled slightly, not fear, but the lingering weakness of a body that had recently fought for air. Robert wiped his hands on his coveralls before accepting the offering, unfolding it carefully. A child's drawing. 2 stick figures rendered in crayon. One small, colored blue with a sad face. One tall, holding a bright yellow star above its head. Stars scattered across the background, some falling, some rising. "That's you." Michael's voice was soft, still raspy from the intubation tube they'd used during observation. He pointed to the tall figure. "You're the star polisher. You reminded the star how to shine." Robert felt something crack in his chest, a fissure in the armor he'd built around the person he used to be. He crouched to Michael's eye level, the drawing still in his hands. "This is the best drawing I've ever seen, Michael. I'm going to put it somewhere very special." Michael's smile was shy, uncertain, but genuine. "Mommy said you were brave. She said you saved me." The crack widened. Robert had to swallow twice before he could respond. "Your mommy is very smart. And you were brave too. You did exactly what I asked, even when you were scared." Patricia's hand settled on Michael's shoulder, a gesture of possession and protection. "I came to thank you properly, Mr. Williams. What you did yesterday was remarkable. I've arranged for a substantial bonus to be added to your next paycheck." Robert stood folding the drawing and sliding it into his pocket. Every instinct screamed that this was a test, that accepting money would trigger some invisible tripwire. "That isn't necessary, ma'am. I just did what anyone would have done." "No." Patricia's tone dropped from warm to absolute. "Not just anyone could have done that. Where did you learn to handle a medical crisis with such precision? There it was, the question that would define everything that followed. Robert had spent 5 years building a cover story so boring it deflected curiosity, a high school graduate who'd bounced between manual labor jobs, nothing special, nothing worth investigating. But that story couldn't account for the clinical expertise she'd witnessed. First aid courses. The company requires them for facilities staff, and I watch a lot of medical shows on TV. The lie was weak, transparent, and they both knew it. Patricia's expression didn't change, but something shifted behind her eyes. Recognition that he'd chosen to maintain the fiction rather than volunteer truth. She would respect the attempt while simultaneously crushing it. I see. Well, my offer stands. If there's anything you need, anything at all, my office is aware that you have my gratitude. It wasn't an offer. It was bait designed to see if he'd take it, if desperation would override caution. A man with medical bills and a sick daughter should be scrambling for any financial lifeline. That he wasn't told her everything she needed to know about the stakes. Patricia guided Michael toward the elevator. The boy waved over his shoulder a small gesture that carried more weight than he understood. Robert waved back, watching them disappear behind closing doors. He stood in the corridor for 10 seconds, counting heartbeats before returning to his buffer. But his hands were shaking now, adrenaline spiking belatedly as his mind played through worst-case scenarios. She knew something was wrong. She would keep digging. And eventually she would find St. Vincent's, the inquiry, the sealed records, and the dead child with Leo Martinez written on his chart. And then everything, Emma's only chance, his fragile cover, the life he'd built from ruins, would collapse. 3 floors below, in a section of the building most staff forgot existed. The mechanical failure continued its slow, catastrophic progression. The cryogenic freezer's primary pump was working overtime to compensate for the failing secondary system, running hot, burning through coolant faster than normal. The unit's internal temperature had risen 0.3 degrees Celsius over the past 6 hours. Not enough to trigger emergency protocols, but enough to begin degrading the delicate biological samples stored inside. Dr. Williams's research was dying by increments, and no alarms were ringing. The building settled into its late-night rhythm. Security guards made their rounds, nodding to Robert as he worked through his assigned sectors. He was methodical, hitting every corridor on the checklist, maintaining the appearance of normalcy. But his route took him past the immunology wing 3 times, and each time he slowed fractionally, looking for any sign that something was wrong. At 2:47 a.m. he heard it. A high-pitched whine, barely audible beneath the building's ambient hum. The kind of sound that meant mechanical stress, a system working harder than it should. He'd worked enough buildings to know the difference between normal operation and impending failure. The sound was coming from Dr. Williams's main laboratory. Robert stopped floor buffer idling and looked through the small window in the lab door. The space was dark except for the glow of computer monitors left running. Near the back wall, the large cryogenic freezer had a small red indicator light blinking on its control panel, a warning that should have been impossible to miss. Except someone had placed a piece of black electrical tape over it, rendering it nearly invisible in the low light. His blood went cold. This wasn't mechanical failure. This was sabotage. Deliberate, calculated, designed to look like equipment malfunction while destroying months of irreplaceable work. Work that represented the only hope for children like Emma. Protocol said call security. Security would call the on-call lab technician. Response time 20 to 30 minutes minimum. By then the temperature would have risen enough to damage or destroy the samples. Cultures that took weeks to grow. Data that couldn't be recreated. Research that was literally saving lives. His mind screamed at him to walk away, maintain cover, stay invisible. But his feet were already moving toward the door, his hand reaching for the master key card on his belt. The card was low-level access, basic facilities clearance. It wouldn't open research labs. Except 2 months ago he'd spent 3 careful nights in the server room using knowledge from his previous life to modify the RFID chip, grant himself elevated permissions without logging the change. Insurance against the possibility he'd need to access areas custodians weren't supposed to enter. He'd never thought he'd actually use it. Robert swiped the card. The lock clicked open with a soft beep that sounded like a gunshot in the quiet corridor. He slipped inside, letting the door close behind him with a pneumatic hiss. The cryogenic freezer's control panel was at eye level, the display showing an error code he recognized from his biomedical engineering coursework years ago. E-07 secondary pump failure. He popped the access panel, following the coolant lines with practiced eyes. The secondary pump's feed tube was loose, not broken, not disconnected, just loosened enough to create a slow leak that would cause cascading failure over hours instead of minutes. Someone who knew exactly what they were doing had done this. Robert could fix it in 30 seconds. Reconnect the line, clear the error code, restart the secondary pump. But he'd be on camera, and the timestamp would show a custodian performing complex maintenance on research equipment. Questions would be asked that he couldn't answer without destroying his cover. Emma's face flashed in his mind. Pale, translucent skin, eyes too large for her thin face. The way her breathing had sounded this morning, labored and shallow, even with the oxygen support. This freezer held Dr. Williams' work. That work was Emma's only chance. Robert pulled out his pocket notebook, the kind he used for maintenance notes. He wrote 4 words in block letters disguising his handwriting: "Check coolant pump 2. Valve loose." He tore out the page, folded it twice, and slid it under Dr. Williams's keyboard, where she'd find it first thing in the morning. Not a fix, but a warning. Enough to save the research without exposing himself. He closed the access panel, wiped down any surfaces he'd touched, and slipped back into the corridor. The whole operation had taken 90 seconds. He was already at the end of the hall, buffer running, when he heard the lab door's lock re-engage. The paper beneath the keyboard felt like a live grenade. Dr. Jennifer Williams arrived at the lab at 6:43 a.m., 3 hours earlier than usual because sleep had been impossible. The contamination failures were following a pattern she couldn't quite identify, something systematic beneath the apparent randomness. She'd spent the night running statistical models looking for correlations between batch failures and environmental variables. She almost missed the folded paper on her keyboard, almost threw it away as trash from the night cleaning crew. But something about the careful fold, the deliberate placement, made her pause. 4 words in blocky anonymous handwriting: "Check coolant pump 2. Valve loose." Her first reaction was irritation, some kind of prank or misdirection. But the specificity nagged at her. Not check the freezer or temperature problem. This was precise technical pointing to a specific component in a specific system. She walked to the cryogenic unit. Everything looked normal. Temperature stable, primary indicators green, no obvious alarms. She was about to dismiss the note when her eyes caught a glint near the control panel, the edge of black electrical tape covering one of the status lights. Her heart rate spiked. She peeled the tape off, revealing a red warning light blinking steadily beneath. Secondary system failure. She yanked open the access panel with more force than necessary, following the coolant lines to the secondary pump. And there, the feed tube hanging loose by a millimeter, coolant seeping into the reservoir instead of circulating through the system. The primary pump was compensating, running at 140% capacity, burning itself out to maintain temperature. Another 6 hours and it would have failed completely. The samples would have warmed above critical thresholds. Months of work destroyed. And someone had covered the warning light with tape. Jennifer's hands were shaking as she reconnected the line, the action automatic from years of equipment maintenance. Her mind was racing through implications. The tape, the loosened valve, this wasn't equipment failure. This was deliberate, precise. Someone with technical knowledge and physical access had sabotaged her research, and someone else who had discovered it and left a warning. She looked at the note again. The handwriting was disguised, blocky and impersonal. But the knowledge it represented was specific. Someone who understood cryogenic systems. Someone who'd recognized the whine of a failing pump. Someone who had access to the lab at night. Facilities staff. Had to be. But which one, and why help her instead of reporting through normal channels? Jennifer stared at the anonymous note for 3 hours, through 2 failed attempts at running new cell cultures and 1 confrontation with a visiting board member who wanted to know why the latest progress report showed regression instead of breakthrough. The paper sat on her desk, like evidence in a crime she was still trying to define. Someone had sabotaged her work. Someone else had warned her. The question of which someone mattered more was beginning to consume her. She couldn't trust security they reported directly to Patricia Johnson, and Jennifer had learned years ago that corporate hierarchies valued protecting assets over protecting people. She couldn't trust her research team. The sabotage required inside knowledge of lab protocols and equipment specifications. That left her with exactly one option: find whoever left the note and force them to explain what they knew and how they knew it. The security footage system was technically restricted, but Jennifer had administrative access to her wing's cameras for monitoring controlled experiments. She logged in, pulled up the hallway feed from the previous night, and began fast-forwarding through hours of empty corridor. Midnight passed. 1 a.m. The timestamp clicked over to 2 when a figure appeared, gray coveralls and a floor buffer, moving with the methodical pace of someone who'd walked this route 1,000 times. Robert Williams, the custodian who'd saved Michael Johnson's life with the precision of an emergency room professional. Jennifer watched him pause outside her lab door, head tilted as if listening. He set down the buffer, pulled a keycard from his belt, and swiped it across the reader. The door opened. He slipped inside, and the timestamp showed he stayed for exactly 93 seconds before emerging and continuing down the corridor as if nothing had happened. A custodian with medical skills that shouldn't exist, accessing a restricted laboratory in the middle of the night, leaving a note that demonstrated expert knowledge of cryogenic systems. The variables were clicking into place, forming a pattern that shouldn't be possible, but was the only explanation that fit the data. Jennifer didn't wait for morning. She took the elevator down to the 17th floor at 11:47 p.m., found him at the end of the west corridor, scrubbing baseboards with the kind of focused attention people used when they wanted to appear busy while avoiding interaction. "Mr. Williams?" He flinched, actual physical recoil, before catching himself and standing slowly. His face assembled into neutral politeness, but his eyes were calculating escape routes. "Dr. Williams, you're working late." "So are you." She held up the folded note. "Did you write this?" His gaze flicked to the paper, then back to her face. Muscles in his jaw tightened fractionally before smoothing out. "I'm sorry, doctor. I don't know what that is." The lie was careful, practiced, and utterly unconvincing. Jennifer had spent her career reading data, identifying patterns in noise. Body language was just another data set. "Don't. I have security footage of you entering my lab at 3:14 a.m. I found this note on my keyboard. The coolant pump valve was exactly where you said it would be." Something shifted behind his eyes. Not quite panic, but close. The expression of someone watching their carefully constructed world develop stress fractures. There must be a mistake. Sometimes we empty biohazard bins at night. The schedule rotates. The bins were empty when I left at 6 p.m. yesterday. Jennifer's voice was ice over steel. "And custodians don't diagnose pending failures in cryogenic secondary coolant pumps. I'm going to ask you one more time, who are you?" The neutral mask slipped. For 3 seconds she saw raw desperation underneath the look of a man hanging from a cliff by his fingernails, knowing that answering her question meant letting go. Then the mask reassembled, thicker this time, but more fragile. "I'm the custodian." "No." Jennifer stepped closer, invading the bubble of personal space, forcing confrontation. "You're not. Army medic, biomedical engineer, someone with enough training to run a pediatric ICU." His breath caught just a hitch, barely noticeable, but confirmation enough. She'd hit something true. Jennifer pressed the advantage. "The way you handled that child in the lobby wasn't first aid training. That was clinical expertise. And this," she shook the note, "this is systems-level knowledge that takes years to acquire. So I'll ask again, who are you, and what are you doing in my building?" Robert's hands clenched at his sides, the first crack in his composure. When he spoke, his voice was rough, scraped raw. "Does it matter I saw something wrong? I couldn't just walk away and let months of research die." "Why?" The question was genuine curiosity, now not interrogation. "Why do you care about my research?" His laugh was bitter hollow. "Because your work isn't just about data and funding, doctor. It's about people running out of time. There are kids counting on you to succeed, kids who don't have the luxury of waiting for you to figure out someone's sabotaging you from the inside." The words hit Jennifer with unexpected force. She'd spent so long focused on molecular binding agents and cellular response patterns that she'd almost forgotten the end point: actual children, actual families, actual lives hanging on her ability to make cells behave in specific ways. But this man, this person wearing custodial coveralls and scrubbing floors, hadn't forgotten. His desperation wasn't academic. "Who are you trying to save, Mr. Williams?" He flinched again, a full-body recoil this time. His voice dropped to barely above a whisper. "I'm just asking you to be careful. Someone is trying to stop you. The valve being loose, that wasn't an accident. It was designed to look like equipment failure, but it was deliberate." Deflection. He was offering her information while protecting whatever secret he was guarding. Jennifer made a calculation, the kind she'd been trained to make in graduate school when deciding which experimental path to pursue with limited resources. She could push demand answers, threaten to report him to security, or she could accept the tactical alliance he was offering and use the leverage for what mattered most: protecting her work. "Okay, Williams." She folded the note, slipped it into her lab coat pocket. "For now, I won't ask more questions. Your visit to my lab last night didn't happen. But I need you to be my eyes and ears at night. You see things no one else does. If you notice anything out of place, anything, you come directly to me. Understood?" The relief that washed over his features was so intense it was almost painful to witness. He nodded once, sharp and controlled. "Understood." Jennifer turned to leave, then paused. "The child in the lobby. You told him a story about stars. That was kind of you." "Everyone deserves to not be alone when they're scared." The words were soft, carrying weight that suggested hard-earned wisdom. As Jennifer walked away, her mind was already cataloging the new variables: a saboteur with inside access, a custodian with medical expertise, and a desperate reason to care about pediatric immunology research. The pieces didn't quite fit together yet, but the pattern was beginning to emerge. Behind her, Robert Williams leaned against the wall, eyes closed, breathing carefully controlled. He'd survived the confrontation, but the cost was increasing visibility. "Doctor." Williams now knew he was more than he appeared. She'd accepted a temporary truce, but truces were fragile things dependent on continued mutual benefit. And somewhere above them both, Patricia Johnson was pulling threads that would eventually unravel everything. Patricia's phone lit up at 6:23 a.m. with a text from her head of security. The message was brief: "Found something in the gap. Call when able." She made the call from her office, standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city as dawn painted the sky in shades of copper and steel. Below, early morning traffic was beginning to clog arterials, commuters flowing toward their designated spaces in the economic machine. From this height, individual lives were invisible, reduced to vehicles and trajectories. "What did you find?" Patricia's voice was crisp, efficient, designed to extract maximum information in minimum time. "The 4-year gap. He wasn't on any financial grid, but we cross-referenced hospital admission records like you suggested. His daughter Emma Williams was a long-term patient at St. Vincent's Pediatric Hospital. Severe autoimmune deficiency, multiple extended stays, experimental treatment protocols." Patricia's fingers tightened on the phone. A sick child explained the medical debt, the bankruptcy, the desperate quality she'd sensed beneath Robert Williams's careful neutrality. But it didn't explain the skills. And Williams himself. "That's where it gets interesting." Her security chief's voice carried the satisfaction of someone who'd cracked a difficult puzzle. "There was a nurse on that same pediatric ICU floor, young guy mid-20s at the time. Hospital records flag him as exceptionally skilled. They used the word prodigy in his performance reviews. He resigned suddenly during his 2nd year." The pieces were assembling into a picture. Patricia recognized the shape of institutional betrayal, of someone crushed between machinery designed to protect itself rather than people. "Let me guess. Something went wrong, and he took the fall." Equipment malfunction resulted in patient death. 7-year-old boy ventilator failure during a routine procedure. Hospital launched an internal inquiry, but before it concluded, the nurse resigned. They sealed the records as part of a settlement agreement. Settlement means they paid him to disappear, which means they were covering up their own negligence. Patricia's mind was running liability calculations, Legal exposure, the kind of corporate damage control she'd orchestrated herself on less sympathetic cases. Did you get a name? Employment file listed him as Robert Williams. Same date of birth, same social security number. He was working at Street. Vincent's the entire time his daughter was a patient there. The full picture crystallized. A pediatric ICU nurse talented enough to be called a prodigy, watching his own daughter deteriorate while treating other children. Then a catastrophic equipment failure that killed a patient and destroyed his career. The hospital offering money and silence in exchange for his disappearance. Him taking it because he had medical bills that would bankrupt anyone without deep resources, because fighting would mean legal fees he couldn't afford, because his daughter needed him functional rather than destroyed by a battle he couldn't win. Patricia understood that calculation. She'd built her empire on understanding exactly how desperation shaped decisions. Her first instinct was elimination. Fire him, erase the liability of having a disgraced medical professional with a patient death in his history working anywhere near a research facility. Clean, simple, defensible. But the image of Michael's face, blue-tinged and oxygen-starved, intruded on the calculation. Robert Williams had been the only person in that lobby who'd known exactly what to do, while her security team fumbled and doctor. Williams froze. He'd saved her son's life with the kind of expertise that couldn't be faked. And he had a daughter, a little girl whose only hope was the same research being sabotaged in Dr. Williams's laboratory. Patricia made a decision that would have surprised anyone who'd negotiated against her. Instead of destroying Robert Williams, she was going to use him. 2 nights later, she found him cleaning the windows outside the cryogenic storage area, spraying and wiping with mechanical precision. He saw her reflection in the glass before she spoke, his shoulders tensing with the awareness of approaching threat. "We need to talk, Mr. Williams." She was holding her tablet, the screen displaying a document she'd pulled from sealed hospital records through channels that would horrify her legal team if they knew she'd accessed them. St. Vincent's Pediatric Hospital, the ICU. You were a nurse there for 2 years. The cleaning cloth dropped from his hand, hitting the floor with a wet slap. His face went ashen, all the color draining, as if someone had opened a valve. This was the confrontation he'd been dreading, the moment where his past and present collided with enough force to destroy both. "They called you a prodigy?" Patricia kept her voice level, clinical, presenting facts without judgment. "Until an incident with a ventilator. A 7-year-old boy died. Leo Martinez. The hospital claimed mechanical failure, but the inquiry focused on you. You resigned before they could fire you." Robert couldn't speak. His throat worked, swallowing words that wouldn't form. This was worse than any nightmare because it was real, standing in front of him in a designer suit holding evidence of the worst day of his life. "And your daughter." Patricia's voice softened fractionally, the mother in her recognizing grief even while the CEO calculated advantage. "Emma. Severe primary immunodeficiency. The same condition Dr. Williams' research is designed to treat." He found his voice finally a broken whisper. "Please, don't." "Don't what?" "Don't expose the fact that I have a disgraced nurse with a dead child in his history working 30 feet from a lab conducting pediatric research." The words were brutal, designed to strip away any remaining illusions about his position. Robert's eyes closed, his hands gripping the window ledge for support. "It wasn't my fault. The ventilator was faulty. I documented it, 3 separate reports about the alarm system failure. They buried the reports because admitting equipment problems would open them to liability for every patient who'd used that model. So they blamed me instead." Patricia studied him, reading body language, tone, the micro-expressions that accompanied truth versus fabrication. She'd built her career on identifying lies, and what she saw in Robert Williams wasn't deception. It was the exhausted honesty of someone who'd stopped believing justice existed. "It doesn't matter what I believe. It only matters what it looks like. And right now, it looks like a liability I cannot afford." "So you're going to fire me?" Not a question. Resignation to inevitable consequence. That was my first thought. Patricia swiped the tablet screen, pulling up a new document. "But you saved my son's life. That buys you one chance. One opportunity to earn something beyond my silence." Confusion replaced despair in his expression. He'd been braced for termination for exposure for the destruction of the fragile stability he'd built. An offer, even one wrapped in threat, was unexpected enough to throw him off balance. Dr. Williams' project is being sabotaged. Patricia watched his face carefully, cataloging his reaction. Surprise, but not the kind that came from new information. The kind that came from someone else confirming what you'd already suspected. My investment is at risk. Someone with inside knowledge is destroying months of research, making it look like equipment failures and contamination. I don't understand what this has to do with... You're in a unique position, Mr. Williams. Patricia's voice carried the weight of absolute certainty, the tone she used when there was no room for negotiation. You're invisible. You have access to areas and times when most staff aren't present. You see things that happen in shadows. I want you to find out who is trying to destroy this project. The implications hit him with visible force. You want me to spy for you. I want you to be a concerned employee who cares deeply about protecting valuable research that could save children's lives, including potentially your daughters. Patricia leaned forward, dropping her voice to a dangerous whisper. Here's the arrangement. You will report everything you observe directly to me. Not to Dr. Williams, not to security, to me. You will be my eyes in the places I cannot see. Robert's jaw clenched. And if I refuse, then this file, Patricia tapped the tablet, about your past, about Leo Martinez, about the settlement agreement you signed, all of it goes to every news outlet in the city. Your daughter will never get access to Dr. Williams' trial because no research institution will risk the liability of association with you. Emma will die because you chose pride over pragmatism. The cruelty was calculated, designed to eliminate any illusion that he had choices. Patricia had learned decades ago that people negotiated more honestly when they understood exactly how trapped they were. Offer false hope and they waste time looking for escape routes. Show them the walls and they focus on the only door available. But if I help you, his voice was barely above a whisper, then I will personally ensure your daughter receives access to the HVT 074 trial. I will sign off on a compassionate use exemption. I will clear your name quietly through legal channels that won't attract attention, but thoroughly enough that you could work as a nurse again if you wanted. Patricia paused, letting the weight of the offer settle. I can save her life, Mr. Williams, but you have to help me save my investment first. Robert Williams stood in the corridor, floor cleaner pooled around his dropped cloth, staring at the woman who held every card in a game he hadn't known he was playing. His daughter's life against his integrity. Survival against the last shreds of the person he used to be. There was no choice. A father doesn't get to have principles when his child is dying. He picked up the cleaning cloth with shaking hands. I'll do it. Patricia nodded, satisfied. I've created a secure email address. Send daily reports. Everything you see, everyone who seems suspicious, any anomalies in patterns. She forwarded the contact information to his phone with a gesture. And Williams, if you try to warn Dr. Williams, if you deviate from our arrangement in any way, the consequences will be immediate and permanent. Do you understand? I understand. The words tasted like ash. Patricia left him there alone in the corridor with the ruins of whatever integrity he'd managed to salvage from St. Vincent's. She felt no guilt. Guilt was a luxury for people who couldn't see 5 moves ahead. Robert Williams was a tool precisely calibrated for the task she needed accomplished. His desperation made him reliable in ways salary never could. The next 72 hours were a special kind of hell for Robert. Every interaction carried the weight of potential betrayal, every observation a choice between protecting Jennifer Williams and protecting his daughter. He moved through his shifts in a fugue state, mechanical and hollow, sorting each piece of information into categories relevant to Patricia, irrelevant, too dangerous to report. His first report, sent from a library computer miles from his apartment, was deliberately sparse. Subject: night observations. Dr. Richard Miller from Oncology, accessing Immunology Wing, 11:47 p.m. Used his credentials to enter imaging lab, stayed 34 minutes. New contract custodian spending unusual time near server room, behavior inconsistent with cleaning duties. He hit send and immediately wanted to vomit. He'd just given Patricia ammunition against people who might be innocent, who might have legitimate reasons for their presence. But he'd also held back the critical information about Jennifer finding the note about their agreement about the alliance forming between them. Walking the line between two loyalties was going to destroy him. Patricia's response came within an hour, a simple text reading, "Good. Continue." The next night, Robert watched from the shadows as two of Patricia's security personnel began following Dr. Miller with the subtle persistence of corporate surveillance. By the third night, the contract custodian he'd mentioned was quietly terminated, his access revoked without explanation or fanfare. Patricia was acting on his intelligence with terrifying efficiency, pruning her organization of potential threats based on his observations. The power was intoxicating and horrifying in equal measure. His interactions with Jennifer became strained, careful dances around the information he couldn't share. He still left her notes when he discovered things, temperature fluctuations in the incubators, a security badge left in a restricted area, supply deliveries that didn't match order manifests. But the notes were terser now, stripped of any personality, offering data without context. Jennifer noticed the change. Her ghost in the machine was pulling away, becoming distant exactly when she needed him most. The pressure of Patricia's deadline was crushing her, and now her only ally felt like he was slipping through her fingers. Then on the sixth night of Robert's assignment, Jennifer had her breakthrough. She'd been following one of his earlier tips, cross-referencing supply logs with contamination incidents. Every failed batch had used cell culture filters from the same manufacturer lot. She isolated the remaining filters from that batch, ran them through spectral analysis, and found trace amounts of a lipophilic contaminant that would be invisible in standard quality checks but catastrophic for cell binding. Someone had deliberately contaminated an entire lot of filters, knowing that the randomness of which experiments used which supplies would make the pattern look like bad luck rather than sabotage. Jennifer set up a control experiment using uncontaminated filters running the same binding protocol that had failed 3 times. She started the process at 8 p.m. and stayed through the night watching the cellular response in real time through fluorescent microscopy. At 3:17 a.m., the cells began binding to the therapeutic agent with the precision and efficiency her models had predicted. The data flowing across her screens was beautiful, clean, consistent proof that her life's work wasn't flawed, just under attack. She wanted to shout to wake up Christopher and make him witness the vindication. But more than that, she wanted to find the quiet custodian who'd made this possible with his anonymous notes and midnight vigilance, thank him for seeing what everyone else had missed. But Robert Williams wasn't in the building. He was at the community clinic with Emma, listening to Dr. Rodriguez deliver news that had the weight of a death sentence. "The immunosuppressants aren't holding her anymore, Robert. Her T-cell count is at 42, that's below critical threshold. The inflammation markers are showing active disease in her kidneys now." Dr. Rodriguez's voice carried the exhaustion of someone who delivered terrible news too often. "We're running out of options. It's time to start planning for comfort care." Comfort care. Palliative measures. Hospice. The euphemisms stacked up like barriers between Robert and the truth he couldn't accept. What about increasing the dosage again? We're already at maximum safe levels. Her liver function is showing stress from processing the medications. If we push harder, we'll cause organ damage that could kill her faster than the disease. Dr. Rodriguez's hand rested gently on Emma's medical chart. "I'm sorry. I know about the trial at Holloway, but they're not accepting new patients. The best we can do now is keep her comfortable and give you time to say goodbye." Robert's voice was flat, drained of emotion, because feeling anything would crack the control that kept him functional. "How long?" "Months, maybe. Could be 6 if we manage the symptoms aggressively. But Robert..." Dr. Rodriguez's voice softened, the doctor receding to reveal the human underneath. "You should start preparing yourself. And her. She deserves to know what's happening." Robert carried Emma out of the clinic, her thin arms around his neck, her breath warm against his shoulder. She was so light, all sharp angles and fragile bones, more idea than substance. In the car, she asked why Dr. Rodriguez had looked so sad, and he told her the doctors were working very hard to help her feel better, which was true enough to pass for honesty. He didn't tell her she was dying. Didn't explain that the trial that could save her was locked behind bureaucratic walls he'd sold his integrity trying to scale. Didn't mention that he was now trapped between two impossible choices, serving the woman who could give Emma access while betraying the scientist whose research was Emma's only hope. That night he sent Patricia a report he'd been holding back. Subject breakthrough: Dr. Williams achieved successful cell binding using alternate filter batch. Proof of concept confirmed. Research is viable. The response came immediately. Details. What process changes did she implement? Robert stared at the message, understanding the real question beneath the words. Patricia wanted the proprietary methodology, the specific techniques Jennifer had protected with paranoid secrecy. She wanted the intellectual property that would let her bypass Jennifer entirely, take the research and monetize it without the scientist who'd created it. Giving her that information would gut the very project that held Emma's future. But refusing would cost him Patricia's support, and with it, Emma's chance at the trial. His hands shook as he typed, "I don't have access to her research notes or protocols. What I reported is what I observed. The filters were the variable. The lie was thin gambling that Patricia would believe his limited access rather than questioning his defiance." The response took 3 minutes, an eternity of waiting, before his phone buzzed. "Find a way to get more detailed information. I'm not asking for observations, Williams. I'm asking for process documentation. You have 48 hours. Robert's stomach dropped. She was escalating, demanding intelligence he couldn't provide without completely betraying Jennifer. The walls were closing in from both sides, Patricia's expectations and his own conscience, such as it was, fighting over the scraps of his soul. He didn't respond to the message, couldn't form words that would satisfy her without destroying himself. Instead, he finished his shift in a daze, moving through corridors on autopilot, barely seeing the spaces he was supposed to be cleaning. He was passing Jennifer's lab on his final rounds when the smell hit him sharp, acrid, the distinct chemical signature of hydrogen cyanide mixed with chlorine gas. Volatile, toxic, the kind of industrial accident that killed people in minutes if they couldn't evacuate. Robert's training kicked in before conscious thought. He sprinted to the lab entrance, looked through the window. A large Erlenmeyer flask lay shattered on the floor near a heat vent, its contents spreading in a sickly yellow-green pool. Vapor was rising, already filling the room with lethal concentration. Jennifer was in her glass-walled office 20 feet away, headphones on, completely absorbed in data analysis, oblivious to the death blooming outside her door. The building's safety systems finally registered the contamination. Klaxons began wailing, and heavy steel fire doors started descending from the ceiling, designed to seal off the contaminated section and prevent spread to the rest of the facility. Jennifer looked up, saw the doors closing, and her face went white with comprehension. She ran for the office door, but it was on a separate magnetic lock system designed to contain chemical spills in the office spaces themselves. She was going to be trapped inside with the fumes. Robert didn't think. He acted on instinct, 5 years old, the programming of someone trained to run toward emergencies instead of away. He hit the emergency override panel, smashing the protective glass with his elbow, and slammed the red button. The fire doors froze in their descent, held by a manual override that would last maybe 30 seconds before automatic systems overrode it. Not enough time. He ran to the emergency supply locker, punched in the default code every facility in the country used, because bureaucrats valued standardization over security. The door popped open, revealing respirators, protective gear, fire suppression equipment. He grabbed 2 respirators, strapped one over his face, and dove under the fire door with inches to spare. The chemical vapor was thicker inside, burning his eyes despite the respirator's protection. He could see Jennifer pounding on the glass of her office, her face already showing the flush of cyanide exposure, cherry-red skin. Rapid breathing, the early stages of cellular asphyxiation. The magnetic lock on her door would be controlled by a manual release lever hidden behind a panel near the floor where people wouldn't accidentally trigger it. Robert found it, wrenched the panel open, and threw the lever. The lock disengaged with a heavy clunk. He kicked the door open, thrust the second respirator at Jennifer. "Put this on, now. We need to move." She grabbed the mask, fumbling with straps, her hands shaking from adrenaline and early poisoning. Robert took over, adjusting the fit with practiced efficiency, checking the seal, ensuring she was actually breathing filtered air. Then he grabbed her arm and pulled her toward the fire door, now holding it maybe 6 inches above the floor. They went down together, sliding on their stomachs through the gap like soldiers under barbed wire. Robert felt the door's weight pressing down the override, failing, and shoved Jennifer through ahead of him. He cleared the threshold with seconds to spare before the door slammed shut with the finality of a tomb ceiling. They lay on the corridor floor, breathing hard, as security guards and emergency response teams converged from 3 directions. Alarms were still blaring, the air thick with shouted instructions and radio chatter. Someone threw a thermal blanket over Jennifer, started checking her vitals. Someone else was asking Robert how he'd known, how he'd moved so fast, how a custodian had accessed emergency equipment with that level of expertise. Jennifer pulled the respirator off, looked at Robert with eyes that saw past the coveralls and work boots to the person underneath. He was checking her pupils, her breathing rate, asking medical assessment questions about numbness or chest pain with the clinical precision of an ICU nurse conducting a post-crisis evaluation. "You're a nurse." Not a question, a statement of fact, the final piece clicking into place. "All this time, you're an ICU nurse." Robert froze, the mask dropping from his hands. The lie was finished, shattered by his own inability to watch someone die when he had the skills to prevent it. He could only nod, a small, defeated gesture that confirmed everything. Before he could say anything, before Jennifer could ask the questions building behind her eyes, a voice cut through the chaos. "Mr. Williams?" They both turned. One of Patricia's senior security officers stood there, his expression professionally neutral but his eyes hard. "Miss Johnson has reviewed the security footage of the incident. She wants to see you immediately." The elevator ride to Patricia's office felt like ascending to an execution. Robert stared at his reflection in the polished doors, a man in coveralls stained with chemical residue, his eyes red from vapor exposure, his hands still trembling from adrenaline. He'd saved a life and signed his own death warrant in the same action. Patricia now had video evidence of him accessing emergency systems, demonstrating medical expertise, revealing himself as something far beyond a custodian. The doors opened to her private office. Patricia stood before a wall-sized monitor showing the rescue on a loop, Robert diving under the fire door, administering the respirator, conducting his medical assessment. She turned as he entered, her expression unreadable. "Leave us." The security officer vanished, the door clicking shut with mechanical precision. Robert stood in the silence, waiting for the hammer to fall. He'd defied her implicit instructions to remain invisible, drawn attention to himself in the most public way possible. Worse, he'd shown capabilities that raised questions about everything else. His access to Jennifer's lab, his knowledge of the sabotage, the depth of his involvement in protecting research, Patricia wanted controlled. "The official report will call it an accident." Patricia's voice was quiet, contemplative. "A cracked flask, a faulty sensor. Corporate will issue a safety review update, some protocols, and everything returns to normal." She finally turned to face him, and her expression was impossible to read, not angry, not grateful, something more complex and dangerous. "But you and I both know that's not what happened. Someone placed that flask exactly where it would shatter when the heat vent activated. Someone wanted Dr. Williams dead." Robert's stomach clenched. He'd been so focused on the immediate crisis that he hadn't processed the implications. The flask positioned above the vent, the timing, the precision of it. This wasn't an accident. It was an assassination attempt dressed as industrial negligence. "You defied me." Patricia's voice carried weight like gravity, pulling him down. "Less than a week ago, I gave you explicit instructions. Remain invisible, gather intelligence, report to me. Instead, you revealed yourself as a highly trained medical professional in front of security cameras, emergency personnel, and the very scientist you were supposed to be monitoring. She would have died." The words came out harder than Robert intended, carrying defiance he didn't know he still possessed. "I couldn't just watch." "I know." Patricia cut him off, her voice softening fractionally. "And that's why I'm not firing you, because you're exactly what I thought you were, someone who will do the right thing even when it destroys him. That makes you useful in ways that simple employees never are." She walked to her desk, pulled up a file on her tablet. "I have your complete history now. St. Vincent's, the ventilator, Leo Martinez. I have the settlement agreement you signed. I have the buried maintenance reports documenting the equipment failures. I have everything. Robert's heart was hammering. This was the moment he'd dreaded for 5 years, when the past caught up and obliterated any possibility of future. But Patricia wasn't done. The hospital that did this to you, that blamed you for their negligence, that paid you to disappear, they're a subsidiary of Care First Medical Group, which I've been attempting to acquire for the past 18 months. Her smile was sharp, predatory. You're not a liability, Mr. Williams. You're ammunition, and I'm about to teach them what happens when they create evidence that embarrasses me. Robert stared, unable to process what he was hearing. This was supposed to be the destruction of everything. Instead, it sounded like, the old arrangement is over. Patricia's voice shifted into the tone she used when making non-negotiable offers. Here's what's going to happen. My legal team will reopen the inquiry into Leo Martinez's death. They will find your maintenance reports. They will expose Care First's pattern of equipment negligence and documentation destruction, and by the time they're finished, your name will be cleared and your nursing license will be reinstated. The words didn't make sense. People like Patricia Johnson didn't save people like him. They used them, discarded them, moved on. Why would you? Because I can. She leaned forward, her eyes locked on his. And because your daughter needs treatment that I control access to. Emma will receive the HVT-074 therapy. I will personally fund her care at the best pediatric facility in the region. That's my promise to you. The room was spinning. Everything. Robert had lost his license, his reputation, his identity being offered back. And Emma, his dying daughter, guaranteed access to the trial that was her only hope. It was too much, too perfect, and therefore carried a cost he couldn't yet see. What do you want in return? Patricia's smile widened. Your expertise, your loyalty, your willingness to protect what matters regardless of risk. As of now, you are reassigned from custodial services to clinical protocol and safety management. You will work directly with Dr. Williams to secure her research and identify whoever is trying to destroy it. Your cover of being a custodian is blown, so we're pivoting to truth. You're a highly skilled medical professional I've recruited to ensure my investment doesn't get killed by industrial sabotage. She slid a tablet across the desk. Sign the employment contract. The salary is commensurate with your actual qualifications. Benefits include full medical coverage for Emma, housing stipend, and legal indemnification for anything that happened at St. Vincent's. Robert picked up the tablet with numb fingers, scrolling through language that promised everything he'd stopped believing existed. It was real. The contract, the offer, the promise that Emma might actually survive. All of it real, contingent on his agreement to work for a woman who just demonstrated she could destroy him as easily as save him. He looked up, meeting Patricia's eyes. And if I say no, then you walk out of here with nothing. Emma dies. Your past stays buried, but so does your future. And Dr. Williams' research gets sabotaged into failure because you chose pride over pragmatism. Patricia's voice was gentle, almost kind, which made the words hit harder. But you're not going to say no, are you, Robert? Because you're a father first, and fathers don't get to have principles when their children are dying. She was right. Had been right from the moment she'd offered the deal. Robert pressed his thumb to the signature field, watched the contract process, felt the weight of obligation settle over him like chains disguised as rescue. Good. Patricia stood, extending her hand. Welcome to Johnson Biosystems, Mr. Williams. Now let's go tell Dr. Williams she has a new partner. The transformation happened with corporate efficiency that felt almost violent in its speed. 20 minutes after signing the contract, Robert Williams, the custodian, ceased to exist. He was escorted to an empty executive office where tailored suits waited in his exact size shirts, still crisp in their packaging shoes that cost more than his monthly rent. A facilities manager appeared with a new ID badge, gold trim instead of gray. His photo, professionally retouched, his title printed in sans serif authority, clinical protocol and safety manager. The woman who'd spent 2 minutes measuring him for the suits handed him a phone, laptop, and stack of legal documents with tabs marked for signature. She didn't ask questions, didn't comment on the strangeness of a custodian receiving executive onboarding at midnight. In Patricia Johnson's world, people executed instructions and trusted that understanding wasn't their concern. Robert caught his reflection in the office window as he changed someone who looked like he belonged in boardrooms, someone whose expertise was visible in the cut of expensive fabric. The coveralls went into a black garbage bag that the facilities manager whisked away with the efficiency of evidence disposal. By the time he stepped back into the corridor, Robert Williams, the invisible, had been completely erased. Patricia was waiting by the elevators, her posture suggesting this detour had already consumed more time than her schedule allowed. "Dr. Williams is still in her lab. We're going to inform her of the new arrangement together. Let me handle the introduction." They descended in silence, Robert's mind struggling to process how completely his life had pivoted in under an hour. 12 hours ago, he'd been scrubbing baseboards and planning how to survive Patricia's escalating demands for intelligence. Now he was wearing a suit worth more than his car, carrying credentials that gave him legitimate access to the research he'd been desperately trying to protect from the shadows. The dissonance was making his hands shake. Jennifer looked up as they entered, her eyes widening at the sight of Robert transformed. She'd been running post-exposure blood work, checking for any lingering effects from the chemical vapor, and the surprise knocked her completely off her analytical stride. "Dr. Williams." Patricia's voice carried boardroom authority, the tone that didn't invite questions. "I'm assigning a new manager to your project effective immediately. This is Robert Williams. He'll have full access to your lab, your research, and your team. He reports directly to me, and his authority supersedes yours on matters of safety and security protocols." Jennifer's mouth opened, opened again. Her gaze bounced between Patricia's corporate certainty and Robert's uncomfortable rigidity. "With all due respect, you can't just—" "I can and I have." Patricia's interruption was surgical precise. "Mr. Williams's expertise in clinical crisis management is exactly what this project needs, especially given recent accidents. His background includes pediatric ICU nursing, biomedical systems engineering, and emergency response coordination. Credentials. I'm sure you'll find valuable once you stop being offended by my methodology." The words hung in the air like detonated ordnance. Jennifer's eyes snapped back to Robert, reassessing everything she'd assumed about the quiet custodian who'd left anonymous notes. Pediatric ICU nursing explained the lobby rescue. Biomedical engineering explained the cryogenic system knowledge. But it didn't explain why someone with those qualifications had been mopping floors for 5 years. Patricia was already moving toward the exit, her purpose accomplished, and her attention shifting to the next item on her perpetual agenda. "I expect you both to work together. Your deadline hasn't changed. You have 3 weeks to produce viable samples for preliminary human trials. Use the resources I'm providing." The door closed behind her, leaving Robert and Jennifer in a silence thick with unasked questions. Jennifer recovered first, her scientist's mind sorting through the data points, trying to assemble them into coherent pattern. "What just happened?" Her voice carried equal parts fury and bewilderment. 12 hours ago you were a janitor. Now you're my manager wearing a suit that costs more than my car. Who are you?" Robert's throat was dry. He'd known this confrontation was inevitable, but preparation didn't make it easier. "It's complicated. I have a PhD in molecular immunology, and I've been awake for 36 hours. Try me." He pulled a chair away from the lab bench, sank into it with the exhaustion of someone who'd been running on adrenaline and terror for days. "Patricia knows everything. About St. Vincent's, about my daughter, about why I was working as a custodian. She has documentation of the whole disaster." Jennifer's anger shifted into something more complex, recognition that she was seeing someone who'd been systematically destroyed by forces he couldn't control. She pulled another chair over, sat down facing him. "The hospital where you worked. Something went wrong. Equipment failure killed a patient. 7-year-old boy named Leo Martinez." Robert's voice was flat, emptied of emotion because feeling it would make functioning impossible. "The ventilator's alarm system had a documented defect. I'd filed 3 separate maintenance reports. They ignored them because addressing the problem meant recalling every unit and exposing themselves to liability. When Leo died, they needed someone to blame who wasn't the hospital. I was convenient." Understanding crystallized in Jennifer's expression. So they offered you money to disappear, settlement agreement with a non-disclosure clause. Take the payout and your medical bills get paid, fight them, and you get buried under legal fees you can't afford. My daughter was in their pediatric unit at the time. Severe immunodeficiency requiring treatments that cost more per month than I earned in a year. They had leverage and they knew exactly how to use it. Robert met her eyes, letting her see the damage underneath. I took the money, signed the agreement. Let them destroy my reputation because the alternative was watching Emma die while I fought a battle I couldn't win. Jennifer processed this, her mind working through implications. And now Patricia has all the evidence. The maintenance reports, the settlement terms, proof that you were scapegoated. She's going to use it. She's going after Care First Medical Group, the corporation that owns St. Vincent's. She's been trying to acquire them for months, and this gives her ammunition for a hostile takeover. Robert's laugh was bitter. I'm not a liability to her. I'm a weapon. The pieces were assembling into a picture. Jennifer recognized Patricia Johnson's particular brand of strategic ruthlessness, where every person was evaluated for their utility and every tragedy was assessed for its leverage potential. She'd rebuilt Robert's life not from kindness, but from calculation, investing in an asset that would deliver returns. She's blackmailing you. Not a question. She was. Now she's employing me. Robert gestured at the suit, the office, the sudden transformation. New arrangement. She clears my name, reinstates my nursing license, gets Emma into your trial. In exchange, I work for her, protecting the research that could save my daughter's life. Jennifer stood, paced to the window overlooking the city. Lights stretched to the horizon, each one representing lives Patricia Johnson had probably calculated the value of at some point. And me? What's my role in this arrangement? She wants the saboteur caught. Whoever's been contaminating your research, whoever tried to kill you tonight, she wants them identified and eliminated. Robert's voice carried the weight of unwanted expertise. I'm supposed to work with you, use my background to spot things you'd miss, protect the project until it succeeds or fails on its actual merits instead of sabotage. The honesty was unexpected. Jennifer turned back, studying Robert's face for signs of deception or agenda. What she saw was exhaustion, desperation, and the particular kind of damage that came from being crushed between impossible choices. You could have just taken her offer and played along, fed me whatever story she wanted. Why tell me the truth? Because I'm tired of lying, because you deserve to know who you're working with, and because if we're going to stop whoever's trying to destroy your research, we need to actually trust each other instead of playing corporate spy games. Robert stood, the movement careful, controlled. I'm on your side, Jennifer. I always have been. The only difference now is I don't have to hide in the shadows. We can finally fight back. Jennifer considered this, weighing the variables, assessing the probabilities. Robert Williams was a tool being wielded by Patricia Johnson, but tools could have their own purposes. And right now she needed someone with his specific skill set more than she needed ideological purity about corporate manipulation. Okay. The word carried acceptance and calculation in equal measure. Show me what you can do that I can't. 3 hours later, they'd reviewed 6 months of research logs, equipment, maintenance records, and security footage. Robert's analytical approach was different from Jennifer's, where she looked for molecular patterns and statistical anomalies. He looked for human behavior, routine deviations, the fingerprints people left when they thought no one was watching. There. He pointed at a maintenance log entry from 2 months ago. Temperature fluctuation in incubator 3 recorded as equipment drift, but look at the timestamp, 2:47 a.m., exactly 3 minutes after Dr. Miller's badge accessed the secure storage room. Jennifer pulled up the corresponding security footage. Richard Miller, oncology researcher, entering the storage area where environmental controls for multiple labs were centralized. He stayed for 6 minutes, left carrying nothing, his posture suggesting routine business. Could be coincidence. Researchers work odd hours. But Jennifer's voice lacked conviction. She was already cross-referencing Miller's access logs with equipment failures, finding correlation that was too consistent to be random. Christopher Hernandez appeared in the doorway, stopping short when he saw Robert in executive attire instead of coveralls. Dr. Williams, I finished running the binding assay you requested. The results are... He noticed Robert, confusion evident. Sorry, I didn't realize you had a meeting. Christopher, this is Robert Williams. He's been assigned as clinical safety manager for the project. Robert Christopher Hernandez, my lead research assistant. Jennifer's introduction was smooth professional, offering no explanation for the overnight transformation. Christopher's handshake was uncertain, his eyes asking questions his professionalism wouldn't let him voice. Robert recognized the look, the same confusion the emergency responders had shown when a custodian demonstrated expert medical knowledge. Cognitive dissonance between expectation and observation. The binding assay results, Jennifer prompted, pulling Christopher's attention back to science. Successful cell adhesion in all samples. The contamination issue appears resolved. Christopher's excitement broke through his confusion. Dr. Williams, this is it. This is what we've been trying to achieve for 8 months. The therapy actually works. Jennifer's face transformed, professional composure cracking to reveal the passionate researcher underneath. Show me everything. All the data, the imaging results, the control comparisons. They moved to the analysis station, Christopher pulling up screens of data that meant little to Robert but clearly represented vindication to Jennifer. Her hands moved across the interface, isolating variables, checking methodology, looking for flaws that would invalidate the results. But the data held. The therapy she'd spent years developing was finally definitively viable. Robert watched her work, seeing past the scientific triumph to the implications for Emma. This research, this breakthrough that Jennifer had just confirmed, was his daughter's only pathway to survival. And someone had been systematically trying to destroy it. We need to secure this data immediately. His voice cut through their celebration with operational urgency. Multiple redundant backups, off-site storage, everything encrypted. If someone's been sabotaging your research, they're not going to stop just because you had a successful trial. Jennifer looked up, the scientist receding as the target of attempted murder remembered she was in danger. You think they'll try again? I think they tried to kill you 6 hours ago, and when that failed, they're going to escalate to whatever method seems most effective next. Robert pulled out his phone, already composing a message. I'm getting Patricia's security team involved. Full sweep of the lab, background checks on everyone with access, monitoring on all equipment and supplies. That's going to slow down research. Christopher's protest was automatic, the researcher's instinct to protect workflow from administrative interference. Better slow than sabotaged into failure. Robert sent the message, received an immediate response confirming security deployment. Dr. Williams, do you have somewhere secure you can work for the next 48 hours while we audit the lab? Jennifer's jaw set with stubborn resistance. I'm not abandoning my research because someone's playing corporate spy games. Then you're giving them another chance to finish what the chemical trap started. Robert's voice was harder now, carrying the authority of someone who'd managed crisis situations where hesitation meant death. Patricia's investing millions in this project. She's not going to let you die for it, but she'll also not tolerate you taking unnecessary risks. Work from home, work from a secure facility, work from a hotel room. But you're not staying in a lab that someone just tried to turn into a gas chamber. The bluntness cut through Jennifer's resistance. Christopher was already packing up critical samples, moving with the efficiency of someone who recognized when argument was futile. Jennifer watched her lab being secured by professionals who appeared with startling speed, evidence that Patricia's security apparatus had been positioned and ready before Robert even made the request. Everything about this felt orchestrated, controlled, guided by Patricia Johnson's invisible hand arranging pieces on a board Jennifer was only beginning to see. I need to check on Emma. Robert's voice had shifted, the professional authority draining away to reveal the father underneath. Patricia promised access to the trial, but I need to see the facility, understand the protocols, make sure that your daughter gets the treatment before anything else goes wrong. Jennifer finished the thought, her analytical mind recognizing the calculation. Where is she being treated now? Community clinic in Capitol Hill. Dr. Rodriguez has been managing her care, but we're at the limit of what standard immunosuppression can achieve. Her T-cell counts are critical inflammation markers, indicating organ involvement. She has months at best. The words came out clinical, detached, the only way Robert could speak them without breaking. Jennifer pulled up a secure terminal, typed rapidly, accessing patient databases that should have required more authorization than she possessed. Emma Williams, age 7, primary immunodeficiency with autoimmune complications. Last recorded T-cell count was 42. She looked up, her eyes carrying the weight of professional assessment. Robert, that's not months. That's weeks, maybe days if she develops an infection. The floor dropped out from under him. He'd known Emma was deteriorating, but Rodriguez had said months, had been optimistic about managing symptoms, buying time. She was stable 2 days ago. Rodriguez said Rodriguez was being kind, or didn't have access to these results. Jennifer turned the screen so he could see the full panel. These inflammation markers indicate her kidneys are failing. The immunosuppressants are toxic at the doses she needs, and without them, her immune system attacks her own organs. She's caught between 2 failures and the window for intervention is closing fast. Robert couldn't breathe. The suit that had felt like armor suddenly constricted like a vice, crushing his chest, making air impossible. Emma had weeks, not months of planning and careful preparation, weeks of watching her slip away while he scrambled to make Patricia's arrangement deliver on its promises. I need to get her into the trial, now, tonight. His voice was raw, stripped of everything except desperate need. Jennifer's expression softened with something that might have been compassion, or might have been recognition of her own stake in this outcome. The therapy we just validated, it could work for her. The binding mechanism is exactly what her immune system needs. But Robert, we haven't done human trials yet. The protocols aren't approved. The safety data is preliminary at best. Giving her this treatment now would be experimental medicine on a dying child. I know, but it's better than watching her die because we waited for bureaucratic approval. Robert was already moving toward the door, his mind racing through logistics. Patricia promised access. She controls the approval process. We can start treatment tomorrow if you ask her, you give her leverage. Jennifer's voice stopped him. She'll use your daughter's condition to control you, to extract concessions, to make you complicit in whatever agenda she's pursuing. Emma becomes a hostage the moment Patricia realizes how desperate you are. The truth of it hit like a physical blow. Patricia had offered salvation, but salvation from someone who measured everything in terms of utility was always conditional. The moment Emma's treatment became leverage instead of investment, Robert would be trapped in ways that made the current arrangement look like freedom. Then what do I do? Let her die while I protect my independence from the only person who can save her? The question was rhetorical, bitter, aimed at a universe that had presented him with nothing but impossible choices for 5 years. Jennifer pulled up another screen, this one showing research protocols and patient consent forms. We make Patricia think giving Emma the treatment was her idea. We present it as the logical next step in validating the therapy, expedited compassionate use trial with full documentation and oversight. She gets her data, you get your daughter treated, and the power dynamic stays balanced. The strategy was elegant, manipulative, and probably the only approach that wouldn't result in Robert owing Patricia debts he could never repay. You'd do that, risk your research timeline to help Emma. Your daughter's case is exactly the kind of proof of concept that moves experimental therapy toward approval. If the treatment works for her, it validates the entire research program. Jennifer's voice was clinical, but her eyes suggested motivations beyond pure science. And honestly, after tonight, I'm tired of being Patricia's pawn. If we're going to survive her manipulation, we need to start manipulating back. The alliance was solidifying, shifting from reluctant cooperation to active partnership. Robert pulled out his phone, composed a carefully worded message to Patricia. Dr. Williams has identified optimal candidate for expedited compassionate use trial. Request authorization to begin treatment protocols within 48 hours. Full documentation and oversight maintained. The response came within minutes. Arrange presentation for board review tomorrow 9 a.m. Come prepared to defend accelerated timeline. Robert showed Jennifer the message. Her mouth twisted in recognition. She's going to make us pitch it publicly, force us to stake our professional reputations on success. If it works, she gets the credit. If it fails, we take the blame. But Emma gets the treatment. Robert's voice was steady, accepting the terms because the alternative was unthinkable. That's all that matters. They worked through the night assembling presentation materials that would satisfy a board of executives who cared more about liability than lives. Christopher returned with secured samples, joining the effort without question, his loyalty to Jennifer overriding his confusion about the sudden personnel changes. By dawn, they had 47 slides of data protocols, risk assessments, and projected outcomes. A comprehensive argument for why treating a 7-year-old girl with experimental medicine was sound business practice. Robert left at 6 a.m. to check on Emma before the board meeting. She was sleeping when he arrived, her thin chest rising and falling with labored breaths that rattled in ways they shouldn't. Doctor Rodriguez met him in the hallway, her expression carrying news she didn't want to deliver. Her creatinine levels are elevated. The kidney involvement is progressing faster than expected. I've consulted with nephrology, and they're recommending we start dialysis preparation. Rodriguez's hand rested on his arm with professional sympathy. Robert, I'm sorry. We're running out of time faster than anyone anticipated. The world narrowed to a tunnel sound, muffled vision graying at the edges. Dialysis meant Emma's kidneys were failing, meant the disease was winning, consuming her organ by organ, and standard medicine had nothing left to offer except mechanical intervention and eventual futility. I'm getting her into a trial, today, the HVT-074 protocol at Holloway Institute. His voice was distant, disconnected, as if someone else was speaking through him. They're reviewing the application this morning. If approved, we start treatment immediately. Rodriguez's eyes widened. Robert, that trial has been closed for months. How did you? I work for Johnson Biosystems now. Clinical safety management. I have access. The explanation was abbreviated, stripped of context, because full truth would take time he didn't have. Can you prepare her medical records for transfer? Everything they'll need to start the protocol. Of course. But Robert, you understand this is experimental. The risks are significant, and if something goes wrong, she dies. Just like she'll die if we do nothing. At least this way she has a chance. He looked through the window at Emma's sleeping form, memorizing the shape of her face, because superstition whispered this might be the last time he saw her peaceful. Prepare the records. I'll call you after the board meeting. The Johnson Biosystems boardroom occupied the entire top floor of the corporate headquarters, glass walls offering panoramic views that reduced the city to topographical abstraction. 12 executives in suits that cost more than cars sat around an obsidian table, their expressions ranging from skepticism to calculated interest. Patricia presided from the head position, her posture suggesting this was formality rather than genuine inquiry. She'd already made her decision, and the board would ratify it or explain why their judgment was inferior. Robert stood beside Jennifer Christopher in the back with supplementary data ready to deploy if questions required deeper technical detail. The presentation they'd assembled through the night was loaded and ready, but Robert's hands were trembling too hard to trust himself with the remote. Jennifer took over without comment, her clinical competence hiding whatever nerves she felt. Members of the board were here to request approval for expedited compassionate use trial of the HVT-074 therapeutic protocol. Jennifer's voice carried the authority of someone presenting peer-reviewed research, not begging for a child's life. As documented in your briefing materials, we've achieved successful binding in cellular studies and are ready to advance to human trials. She clicked through slides showing molecular structures, binding rates, cellular response patterns. The executives watched with the attention of people evaluating investment opportunities rather than medical breakthroughs. Robert forced himself to breathe, to maintain professional composure, to remember that these people responded to business cases rather than emotional appeals. Jennifer reached the critical slide, Emma's medical profile anonymized to patient demographics and clinical markers. The candidate is a 7-year-old female with severe primary immunodeficiency, current T-cell count of 42, elevated inflammation markers indicating multi-organ involvement. Standard immunosuppressive therapy has reached maximum efficacy. Without intervention, projected survival is 2 to 4 weeks. A board member, older woman with sharp eyes that suggested decades of evaluating risk, leaned forward. And the risk profile of the experimental therapy. Unknown cytokine response potential, allergic reaction, possibility of immune cascade if binding mechanism fails. Janitor didn't soften the dangers. However, the molecular profile suggests strong compatibility, and the alternative is certain death within a month. The risk-benefit analysis favors treatment. Another executive, younger, probably from legal based on his focus on liability implications. If this patient experiences adverse events, the exposure for Johnson Biosystems is fully documented and disclosed. Robert spoke for the first time, his voice steady despite the panic clawing at his chest. The family will sign comprehensive consent forms acknowledging experimental nature and potential risks. All protocols will be documented for FDA review. This isn't reckless experimentation, it's compassionate use under established guidelines. Patricia's eyes fixed on him, reading layers of meaning the rest of the board couldn't access. She knew the patient was his daughter, knew this presentation was desperation dressed as clinical procedure. The question was whether she'd expose him or allow the fiction to stand. Mr. Williams raises an important point. Patricia's voice carried calculated support. Compassionate use trials are established pathways for validating experimental therapies. The data we gather will be invaluable for FDA approval processes, and the humanitarian aspect benefits our corporate positioning. I recommend we approve with standard oversight protocols. The shift in room dynamics was immediate. When Patricia declared support, opposition became career-limiting behavior. The board members exchanged glances, reading the political landscape, recognizing that debate was theater rather than genuine inquiry. The older woman who'd asked about risk spoke again. I move we approve the expedited trial with provisions for daily monitoring, adverse event reporting, and immediate cessation if safety thresholds are breached. Seconded. The younger lawyer already calculating how to minimize liability while maximizing public relations value. Patricia didn't bother with formal vote. Approved. Dr. Williams, you have authorization to begin treatment protocols immediately. Mr. Williams, I expect comprehensive documentation and daily progress reports. This board will reconvene in 1 week to review initial outcomes. They were dismissed with corporate efficiency, the board moving on to the next agenda item before Robert and Janitor had even left the room. In the elevator descending from executive heights, Robert finally allowed himself to process what had just happened. Emma was approved. Treatment could start today, this afternoon, as soon as they could transport her to the facility and prepare the protocols. His daughter had a chance. Janitor was watching him, her expression suggesting she understood exactly how close he'd come to collapsing under the weight of hope mixed with terror. We should get Emma transferred to Carrick Center, Patricia's private pediatric facility. Best equipment, best staff, completely controlled environment. How soon can we start the actual therapy? Robert's voice was rough, scraped raw by the morning's emotional intensity. 12 hours to prepare the binding agent, another 6 for pre-treatment screening. If everything goes smoothly, we could administer the first dose tomorrow morning. Janitor pulled out her phone, already texting instructions to Christopher about sample preparation. I'm going to be there for the whole thing. This is my research, my responsibility. If something goes wrong, then we'll handle it together. Robert met her eyes, the alliance between them solidifying into something that felt like actual partnership. Thank you for presenting it the way you did, for making the board see the science instead of the desperation. I didn't do it for you. I did it because your daughter deserves better than what the world's given her so far. Janitor's voice carried an edge of anger at systemic injustice, at bureaucracies that valued procedure over lives. And because watching her respond to treatment will prove that everything I've sacrificed for this research was worth it. The black car Patricia sent was waiting outside, engine-running driver prepared to transport Emma from the community clinic to Carrick Center. Robert rode in silence, watching Seattle pass by the tinted windows, trying to prepare himself for the conversation where he'd tell Emma that everything was about to change. She was awake when he arrived, sitting up in bed with a coloring book that she was too weak to actually color, just holding the crayon and staring at blank pages. Her smile when she saw him was bright enough to break hearts. "Daddy, did you polish the stars extra shiny last night?" Her voice was thin, raspy, the effort of speaking visible in the way her chest worked. Robert sat on the edge of her bed, taking her small hand in his. The bones felt like bird bones, hollow and fragile. "Sweet bug, I have some news. We're going to a new place today, a special hospital with doctors who have medicine that can make you better." Emma's eyes widened, hope and fear mixing in equal measure. Real better? Like other kids better. That's what we're hoping for. The medicine is new, still being tested, but the doctors think it can help your body remember how to protect itself. He kept his voice steady, offering truth without overwhelming her with complexity she couldn't process. "Will it hurt?" The question every child asks, the fear of pain sometimes worse than pain itself. "A little bit probably, but I'll be right there with you the whole time. And the doctors are very, very good at making sure kids are as comfortable as possible." Robert brushed hair from her forehead, the gesture automatic and achingly familiar. "Do you trust me?" Emma nodded, the movement small but certain. "You polish stars. You make dark things bright. I trust you." The simple faith destroyed him. She trusted him because she was 7 and he was her father, and the world hadn't yet taught her that trust was currency that could be spent foolishly. He pulled her into a hug, careful of the IV lines, feeling her heartbeat against his chest, too fast, too weak, but still fighting. Dr. Rodriguez appeared in the doorway with Emma's medical records compiled in thick folders. "The transport team is ready. I've coordinated with Carrick Center. They're expecting you within the hour. Robert, I've included all her historical data response patterns to previous treatments, genetic markers we've identified. Everything Dr. Williams might need." "Thank you." The words were inadequate for years of compassionate care for Rodriguez, fighting insurance companies and advocating for experimental approaches when standard medicine had nothing left to offer. For everything. For not giving up on her when the protocol said there was nothing left to try. Rodriguez's eyes were wet. "Bring her back to visit when she's better. I want to see her running around causing trouble, being a normal kid instead of my bravest patient." The transfer was orchestrated with medical precision. Emma secured in the transport monitors, beeping steady confirmation of vitals, Robert sitting beside her, holding her hand. The city passed by in a blur of autumn colors, leaves falling from trees in patterns that looked almost deliberate, almost like the universe was shedding old growth to make room for new. Carrick Center rose at the end of a winding drive, all glass and natural light, designed to feel more like a resort than a medical facility. The atrium soared 3 stories, plants growing in carefully tended gardens, the air carrying the scent of earth instead of disinfectant. Emma's eyes went wide with wonder. "Daddy, it's beautiful. Are there really stars here?" "Different kind of stars, sweet bug, but just as special." Robert lifted her from the transport, surprised again by how little she weighed, how much of her had already been consumed by disease. Dr. Sarah Rodriguez, no relation to Emma's previous physician, different person entirely, met them at the entrance. Mid-40s, warm smile that reached her eyes, credentials suggesting expertise in pediatric immunology and experimental therapeutics. "Emma, I'm Dr. Rodriguez. I've heard wonderful things about you, and I'm so excited to help you feel better." She crouched to Emma's level, making eye contact the way good pediatricians did, treating children as people, rather than small malfunctioning adults. "We're going to do some tests first, make sure we understand exactly what your body needs. Then tomorrow we'll give you medicine that's going to teach your immune system how to work properly. Does that sound okay?" Emma looked at Robert for confirmation. He nodded, and she turned back to Dr. Rodriguez with tentative trust. "Will you be nice to my daddy? Sometimes doctors forget that daddies get scared too." The observation was so unexpectedly perceptive that Rodriguez's professional composure cracked into genuine emotion. "I promise to take very good care of both of you. Come on, let me show you your room. It has a window that looks out over the gardens, and we have tablets with every movie and game you can imagine." They settled Emma into a space that looked more like a hotel suite than a hospital room, actual furniture instead of institutional fixtures. Walls painted in soft colors instead of antiseptic white technology concealed behind panels, so the room felt comfortable rather than clinical. Emma was enchanted, exploring with energy she shouldn't have possessed, adrenaline and hope temporarily overriding her body's deterioration. Jennifer arrived an hour later with Christopher, both carrying equipment cases containing everything needed to prepare the therapeutic protocol. She examined Emma with clinical thoroughness, checking vitals, asking questions about symptoms, assessing the baseline they'd be measuring against. "Your dad tells me you think he polishes stars." Jennifer's voice was gentle, the scientist receding to reveal someone capable of connecting with frightened children. "Did you know that's actually kind of true? The medicine we're giving you tomorrow is made from pieces we found by studying how cells shine when they're healthy, so in a way he helped make the stars that are going to make you better." Emma's eyes lit up with the particular joy of having her imaginative framework validated by adult authority. "I knew it. I knew the stars were real." Robert watched Jennifer work, seeing past her analytical precision to genuine care for the small person whose life depended on formulas and binding agents and molecular structures behaving exactly as predicted. This wasn't just validation of research for Jennifer. This was the point where theory became reality, where equations written on whiteboards translated into actual breathing, children getting actual second chances. The preparation consumed the afternoon blood draws, imaging studies, genetic sequencing to confirm compatibility markers. Emma endured it with the stoic patience of someone who'd spent half her life as a medical subject, only complaining when the blood draws hurt more than usual. By evening, they had comprehensive baseline data and treatment protocols customized to her specific cellular markers. Christopher pulled Robert aside while Emma was sleeping. "The binding agent is ready. We've triple-checked the formulation, run it through every safety protocol, confirmed the molecular stability. Dr. Williams wants you to review the consent forms before we proceed." The consent forms were comprehensive, detailing every known risk, every potential complication, every way the treatment could fail catastrophically. Robert signed them with hands that had stopped shaking somewhere during the afternoon's medical procedures. His signature was authorization for Jennifer to inject experimental medicine into his daughter's veins to gamble Emma's remaining time on cellular mechanisms that had only been proven in laboratory conditions. But the alternative was watching her die with certainty instead of possibility, and that wasn't a choice at all. Jennifer found him after midnight sitting in Emma's room watching her sleep. The room was dark except for monitors casting soft blue light, their rhythmic beeping a mechanical lullaby. "Tomorrow morning, 8 a.m. We'll start with a low-dose monitor for allergic response, then increase gradually over 6 hours. Jennifer's voice was quiet, respectful of the sleeping child. "If her body accepts the binding agent, we should see initial response within 12 hours. T-cell production, increase inflammation markers, stabilizing. Real improvement will take days, maybe weeks. And if her body rejects it," Robert had to voice the fear that had been eating him since the board meeting. "Then we stop, immediately manage the reaction, and evaluate next steps." Jennifer sat in the other chair, her exhaustion evident in the shadows under her eyes. "But Robert, the molecular compatibility looks good. Better than good, exceptional. Her genetic markers align almost perfectly with the therapy profile. If this is going to work for anyone, it's going to work for her." The reassurance helped fractionally enough to let him breathe a little easier. "Why are you doing this? You could have presented the research without making it personal, without investing yourself in Emma's outcome. Why take the risk?" Jennifer was quiet for long enough that Robert thought she wouldn't answer. Then, "Because someone tried to kill me to stop this research. Because children are dying while bureaucrats debate approval timelines. Because I'm tired of science being theoretical when it could be saving actual lives." She looked at Emma's sleeping form. "And because your daughter deserves every chance I can give her, regardless of what Patricia Johnson's agenda might be." The honesty was unexpected, vulnerable in ways Jennifer usually guarded against. Robert recognized the gesture for what it was: trust offered in exchange for trust, received alliance, solidifying into something that might eventually be called friendship. "Thank you." The words were inadequate, but he offered them anyway. "For seeing Emma as a person instead of a data point. She's both. That's the hard part about medical research. Every data point is someone's daughter, someone's future, someone's reason to keep fighting." Jennifer stood, heading toward the door. "Get some sleep. Tomorrow's going to be intense, and Emma will need you clear-headed and present." Robert tried to sleep in the recliner beside Emma's bed, but his mind wouldn't settle. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw molecular structures binding or failing to bind, saw Emma's cells accepting or rejecting the foreign proteins, saw futures branching into survival or loss. Schrödinger's daughter simultaneously saved and lost until tomorrow's observation collapsed the quantum state into singular reality. At 3 a.m., his phone buzzed with a text from Patricia Security Sweep of Williams's lab complete. Found remote access device in environmental controls. Reviewing all personnel with technical expertise to identify saboteur. Expect preliminary report by morning. The saboteur was real, confirmed, their tools now evidence in whatever corporate investigation Patricia was conducting. Robert should have felt vindication, but all he felt was exhausted recognition that Emma's treatment was happening against a backdrop of corporate warfare he barely understood. Another text arrived, this one from an unknown number. "Congratulations on getting your daughter into the trial. Hope it works out better than it did for my wife." The message was unsigned, but Robert recognized the bitter tone, the specific reference. Dr. Richard Miller, the oncology researcher whose wife had died while Robert was mopping floors 15 feet from the research that might have saved her. The man Patricia's security was probably investigating for sabotage. Robert stared at the message, understanding crystallizing with sickening clarity. Miller had motive revenge against the system that had let his wife die. He had access credentials that opened doors throughout the research facility. He had expertise, enough knowledge of laboratory systems to make sabotage look like equipment failure. And now he knew about Emma, which meant he knew exactly how to hurt Robert if revenge extended beyond Jennifer's research to everyone Patricia Johnson considered valuable assets. The phone buzzed again. "Don't worry, I'm not going to hurt your daughter. I'm not a monster, just someone who understands what it's like to watch the system fail the people you love." Robert's hands were shaking. He should forward this to Patricia, should report the contact, should trigger whatever security response was appropriate for being contacted by the suspected saboteur. But something in Miller's words stopped him. The recognition of shared grief, the acknowledgement that they were both victims of machinery designed to value profit over people. He typed carefully, "I know what you lost. I'm sorry." The response was immediate. "Not sorry enough to refuse Johnson's help. Not sorry enough to reject the access my wife never got. Save your sympathy, Williams. Just don't pretend you're different from the rest of them." The conversation ended there, Miller's judgment hanging in the digital silence. Robert set the phone down, stared at Emma sleeping peacefully despite the war being waged around her existence. Miller was right. Robert had taken Patricia's offer, had accepted access. His desperation made him willing to compromise, for had become complicit in the same system that had destroyed Miller's family. But he'd do it again. Would make the same choice every time if it meant Emma had a chance. The question was whether that made him pragmatic or just another person the system had broken into accepting its terms. Dawn came too quickly and not fast enough. Dr. Rodriguez arrived at 7 with a team of nurses preparing the room for treatment. Jennifer and Christopher appeared at 7:30 with the therapeutic agent in a specialized container, the liquid inside pale amber and impossibly precious. Emma woke at 7:45, groggy from medication, but aware enough to recognize significance in the activity around her. "Is it time for the star medicine?" "It is, sweet bug." Robert held her hand as nurses positioned monitoring equipment preparing to track every bodily response to the foreign proteins about to enter her system. "Remember what we talked about? It might feel strange at first, might make you a little sleepy or uncomfortable, but we'll be right here watching to make sure you're okay." Dr. Rodriguez checked the IV line, verified the dosage calculation, confirmed with Jennifer that the formulation matched Emma's specific cellular profile. Every step was double-checked, triple-verified, because mistakes with experimental therapeutics on pediatric patients didn't allow for redemption. At exactly 8 a.m., Jennifer began the infusion. The amber liquid flowed through clear tubing into Emma's vein, disappearing into her bloodstream, where it would either bind to her damaged immune cells and begin the reconstruction process or trigger a cascade reaction that could kill her in minutes. Robert stopped breathing, stopped thinking, stopped everything except watching monitors for the first sign of reaction. Jennifer stood at the computer tracking real-time cellular response, her face a mask of focused intensity. Christopher was recording everything, documenting each second for analysis and posterity. 5 minutes passed. 10. 15. Emma's vital signs remained stable, her breathing steady, no signs of allergic response or adverse reaction. The monitors continued their rhythmic beeping, mechanical reassurance that her heart was still beating, her lungs still processing oxygen, her body still fighting. At 20 minutes, Jennifer looked up from her computer, eyes wide with something that might have been hope. "Robert, look at this." The screen showed cellular activity at microscopic level, proteins binding to Emma's damaged T cells exactly as the models predicted. Not just binding, catalyzing regeneration, triggering the production of healthy immune cells, beginning the slow process of rebuilding what disease had destroyed. "It's working." Jennifer's voice carried wonder and disbelief in equal measure. "Robert, it's actually working." Emma stirred, looking up at her father with eyes that seemed clearer than they'd been in months. "Daddy, I feel sparkly inside, like the stars are waking up." Robert couldn't speak, couldn't process the magnitude of watching his daughter's body begin healing itself after 5 years of inexorable decline. He could only hold her hand and let tears stream down his face while Jennifer documented the miracle unfolding in real-time cellular data. The treatment was working. Emma had a chance. And somewhere in the building, Richard Miller was watching it succeed where his wife's treatment had failed, and Robert didn't know whether that made him grateful or guilty or some complex emotion that had no name.